On the 11th minute, so you had just mentioned the Skinner box, Brother Stephen.
Yeah, so I'm not sure exactly when we got cut off, but one of the things I was talking about earlier is that, right? So, like psychologists and neuroscientists, they're trying to look for ways to make video games habit forming, right? And one of these mechanisms that they use is the Skinner box. The Skinner box basically was, I don't know how much I've explained about it before we got cut off, but basically it was an American psychologist named B.F. Skinner. He wanted to see if he could actually create behavior in a subject. And he wanted to see if he could create behavior in rats. So this would be called operant conditioning. And what he did was that he put a rat in a cage, and every time the rat pulled the lever, a piece of food would fall down. So the rat learned to associate the lever with the food in the hatch. But we wanted to see if he could actually get the rat addicted to pushing the lever. So what happened was that he started putting the food through the hatch at random intervals. So basically what this created in the rat was like an obsession in pulling the trigger, because he didn't actually know how many times he would have to pull the trigger in order for a piece of food to come down. So, right, so this type of behavior, it's comparable to gambling, because what happens is that you're rewarded unexpectedly. And right, so this is called the Skinner's box, and this is a phenomenon that's pretty common. What's interesting is that there's a psychologist that's named as Dr. Ben Lewis Evans, and he was the head researcher for Epic Games. So he's a PhD in psychology, and he also taught in neuroscience. And what's interesting is that he gave a conference to video game designers, and he actually put a video of his apartment wall, which was completely covered in diagrams of human behavior, which are basically according to him, this was human driver behavior. So basically what made people tick, like what drives a human being. And I thought that was incredible, because it showed me like how much these people really understand the human mind, like what really makes them tick. And these are the people that are designing like video games. And he put also to these video game designers, he put up what you would call like a schedule of reinforcement. And so this exact behavior that I was speaking of before in the rat, this is what you would call variable reinforcement. So this type of a behavior has a very high response time ratio. And he's basically explaining how to implement this into video games in order to get the highest response time ratio possible in your game.
Epic Games, this is Fortnite.
So this would be Fortnite.
Okay.
And so according to him, it's behavioral psychology, like I said, like, it can make a game fun, but it can also make a game like habit forming. And so I'm thinking, like, according to him, he would say that he wants to make the game like fun, engaging, like stimulating. But my question is, when you're looking at diagrams of human behavior and you're implementing these types of mechanisms, like where do you draw the line between making something fun and making something habit forming? Because this is obviously the effect that it's having. And it's not just, people have started to take notice of that as well, right? It's interesting because in the UK, there was if I can find it, they had the Digital Culture, Sports and Media Committee. They basically grilled the makers of Fortnite exactly for this reason, that they were basically, they were asking if they were made players accountable for the amount of hours that they had been spending on the game. Like Prince Harry, he straight up said that the game's addictive, and it's designed to be addictive, and it shouldn't be allowed in homes. There's actually someone that tried to sue the makers of Fortnite, and I'm not going to get into any of these like controversies, but I think it just goes to show like that people, basically what I'm talking about, people are like waking up to this reality that these games are designed to be habit forming. And what's interesting as well is that, so there's actually, I found a couple of books talking about this exact subject. There's a book that's called Getting Gamers, The Psychology of Video Games and Their Impact on People Who Play Them. And it's interesting because the very opening quote of chapter 7, the author states, Jamie, he says, "The terrible truth is that the whole lot of us begged for a Skinner box we could crawl into, because the real world system of rewards is so much more slow and cruel than we expected it to be," right? And basically he goes on to say later that we're actually, as human beings, we're capable of overcoming like this kind of like Skinner box mentality, but basically we choose not to. We choose to be like, we choose to be like basically like captured by these systems, but drawn into these systems. And I thought that was very illuminating. And also another interesting book is called Hooked by, I don't know if I'm saying his name correctly, but it's Nair Yao.
Sounds good.
And he basically talks about the same thing. He says it's called Hooked: How to Make Habit-Forming Products. And the video game industry like falls into this category, even in the book. And there's basically, it shows that there's a whole science behind creating a habit-forming product. And it's interesting because he says that this is actually imperative for the survival of your product. If you want your product to survive in the market, it has to form a habit. And what's scary is that the way that he defines a habit is that things that we do with little or no conscious thought, right? So I mean, there can be good habits and bad habits, right? But when you start applying that to something like a video game, I think that should be like concerning, you know? Because that's not necessarily like something you want to do with little or no conscious thought, right? Like this, and
just
right?
so before, like, we're gonna get back to this. Like, I'm not gonna. I want you just to keep going because you're on fire, and this is something that you've assimilated, and it's just like seeping out of you, and I love it. Right? We're going to get. I just to clarify myself. Yeah. So what you're saying here is that like it seems like we've kind of evolved in our understanding of human behavior, and it's actually like a science where you can put it down to something like very specific. And if I can get somebody to push the lever and to repeatedly push the lever and to really want to get into that little box and live there, that's for me, like, look, if I'm not a man of God, or if I'm just a worldly normal person like out there, and I know that's probably going to cause some revenue, I would probably invest in these sciences, knowing that my product is going to be, like, it's like tobacco. You know it's going to be consumed from here until the end. People are going to like do it. So it's just, I can understand it. To tell you the truth. If I'm one of these guys, I can understand why you would do it.
But that's what I like. That's what concerns me, because like video gaming, that's not necessarily like a habit that you want. Like a habit that
if it's gonna make me, if it makes me money.
Yeah, I mean, if money's your guy, you would go for that. But I think like as Catholics, right? Like this video is probably mostly Catholics gonna watch this. Right, I think we have to be disciplined, and we have to think critically. Like, how do I spend my time? Like, who designed these products? Like, what draws me back to them? Right, and I think as far as these habit mechanisms, these are mostly seen in mobile games and free-to-play games. So, like, Fortnite would fall into that category. And it's interesting because this author here of Hooked, he was talking about the morality of creating habit-forming products, and he doesn't see anything morally wrong with it. But what's interesting is that in a podcast with this previous author of Getting Gamers, he said that it's okay to make a habit-forming product as long as it's not harmful to the person, and as long as they can quit whenever they want, right? And for me, that kind of mindset just drew a lot of question marks, because something doesn't necessarily need to be harmful in order for it to be bad for you, right? I think there's like, obviously, like, having a drinking disorder or something like that, like, that's obviously harmful. And like video games, they're not going to harm you in the same way as like drugs or alcohol, right? But at the same time, is it really good for me to be spending hours and hours on like video games? Is that good for me? Is that helping me to grow or to like construct something that I would need to, does it help me to grow as a person? So I think that's kind of the mindset I have towards this, like, there's some things that really shouldn't be habit forming, right? And like I said before, it's like one thing to make something fun, and it's another thing to go out of your way and to use behavioral psychology to create a habit, right? I think that's problematic, and I think that's one of the things that needs to be talked about when we talk about video games in general, or like the industry, right? Because the industry is huge, and it encompasses like a huge variety of realities. You're talking about mobile games, console games, like PC games, handheld games, right? It's like, to say the industry, we have to, I think it's important to be nuanced here when we're talking about this, right? So that's a reality that's going on. And what's interesting as well is that like I said before, I have a friend that used to work at EA, and he actually left EA because of this. And actually other people that he worked with also left because of this. And
just to give people an idea, maybe they don't. EA is that?
EA, sorry, that's Electronic Arts. So that's
a big deal.
That's what you call like a AAA gaming company. So that
we
would
had
make
Madden in the States. That was a big game. Here's FIFA. It's probably the
it's the makers of FIFA. They make other games as well.
it's massive.
So yeah, it's huge. It's a big company, right? So but he left because he said he started to. There's also a time when he started to get more into his faith and he started to convert. And he left for what you would call like the greed factor, because working there, what he discovered was that the greed started to creep in to like the mindset of a lot of people that were working there. And he discovered that these people, they were actually doing whatever they could to like milk the players for extra cash, right? And for him, that was like uncomfortable. And in fact, here's like two stories that I think were really interesting. One was that there was like a coworker that came to give a presentation at EA, and they're talking about the makers of Candy Crush, right? So that was the #1 mobile game for a long time.
Yeah.
And he said that what Candy Crush was doing was basically they were using the analytics, and basically as the gamer was playing, they were evaluating the player. And they were actually, sometimes they were actually able to predict the exact minute when the gamer was about to leave the game. And in that exact minute, what they would do is that the game would either give you a reward that the minute they thought you were about to leave, or they would rig the game to make it impossible for you to lose the minute you're about to leave, right? So these are kind of like mechanisms that were like, whoa, like this is like, this is something else.
You don't think they were worried about him having a great time and just like enjoying himself?
That's what I'm saying. Like he started to realize this is starting to become about something. This is more than entertainment. I think he started to realize that. And there's another story as well that was interesting, that he was the lead game designer for a golf game, but he was also designing an exercise game for Xbox. And basically he sat down with his manager one day, and his manager asked him like, so what's the compulsion loop for the game? And then he just had like a moment of silence. He's like, what do you mean? The people want exercise, like those two moments were like, wait a minute, this is actually more than about the game. This is actually about like, making as much money as possible. Right. And, so he left EA, and there's actually other people that left EA as well because they were uncomfortable with these mechanisms that were trying to like create habits in people. And what's interesting is that he went to work at Zynga, which is another mobile company. And when he started working there, he realized that this mobile company, he just basically went from bad to worse, because in this mobile company, they're investing like 5 times the amount of people in creating these sort of mechanisms for these types of games to make people like play as long as possible, because they're interested in what you call retention and engagement, right? So they wanted you to play for as long as possible, and they want you to spend as much money as possible. In these mobile games, and also in EA in general, right? And like I hate generalizing, right? I don't like generalizing.
Yeah, I mean,
but I think I'm just talking from from what I know. And I know like all game companies are like this.
But
I think if it's happening at EA, I would probably think it'd be happening.
You mentioned Fortnite. It probably got cut off, but that was the most played game in 2019, and it's still really played. You're not generalizing the fact that this industry is growing and it's making I think you mentioned to me in 2025 it's going to be something like 200.
I would have to get the stats on that again, but
like you're talking a huge juggernaut that's just getting bigger.
It's grown, and it's getting bigger, and it's just going to get bigger. And I think a big part of that was COVID, because people were in their houses, and people started investing more money in this type of entertainment, right?
Yeah, but you're also getting an element in there like before. Like I don't like what am I gonna say, like an example of like Mario Brothers. You talk about like something maybe before, if you mentioned Super Smash Brothers or something, like maybe something before they didn't have these experts behind it to have these compulsory hooks or loops or whatever. Now like within the measure that's growing, and you're getting more professionals to actually, like, if this industry is growing, you're going to get more psychologists and jobs that are actually studying these things, so it's only going to get more and more addicting. If you think about it, because like this is where the money is. If the money's there, it's gonna have success. But like going back to God and Gaming real quick, these boys, so they're getting, like, the idea is we want to find the seeds of good in it. It's a big industry. What part do Catholics play in that world? You just mentioned a huge and extremely important point there, that we can't be so, I would use the word naive. I don't think innocence is the right word, because that's a good thing, but like naive in front of this industry in the first part, just to know like there's people behind it. Yeah, well, I think that's important. I think we can't just come to this with a consumer mindset. We have to really think about like how these games were designed
like the people that are behind it, like the teams that are working on this. And actually, it actually is something I want to mention, right? So, like I can understand what they're doing in God and Gaming. They want to reach out to the culture, but there's a lot of things I think we need to nuance here, and I think it's not appropriate to like embrace gaming as a lifestyle and a culture for various reasons. One of the things that he mentioned in that video that we had watched earlier was that, or at least the Catholic perception of the world, right? Because he said that, as Catholics, we have to embrace the world positively, right? Because the world in itself is good because God so loved the world, right? I just want to go back to that for a second because there's actually, as Catholics, there's actually three concepts of the world that we have, right? So there's the world as creation. So God created the world and the world's good. So that's creation, the universe. There's the world as in fallen humanity, right? So that's John 3:16. That would fall under that God so loved the world that he gave his only son, right? And there's also, so this is all from the scriptures. I'm not just making this up, but there's a third concept of the world that is actually like fallen humanity under the dominion of Satan. And that's extremely clear in the scriptures. So I'm just going to read out a couple of these, right? So in the first letter of John says, "For all that's in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the boastful pride of life is not from the Father, but from the world," right? And in Romans, St. Paul says that, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good, acceptable, and perfect," right? And in the letter of James writes, "You adulterous people, do you not know that friendship with the world is hostility with God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of this world makes himself an enemy of God," right? So in this sense, they're talking about a world that's under the dominion of Satan and under the dominion of sin, right?
You just had it on Sunday. Satan showed him all the kingdoms. He said, this belongs to me.
That's another one, right? So in the temptations, when Jesus is being tempted in the desert, the devil actually reveals himself to be the prince of the world. He actually says that all of this has been given to me, right? He shows them all the kingdoms of the world, right? So
that's a good distinction. So I'm glad you made that.
So, and also in 3 times in the Gospel of John, the gospel writer of John refers to the devil as the ruler of the world, right? So we know that the world is under the dominion of Satan, right? That's, as Catholics, we know that and we believe that. So what's my response then? So as a Catholic, I have to embrace the world through the lens of the gospel. I have to embrace it through the lens of the tradition of the church, the gospel, and I can't just embrace the world as it is, right? I have to go through this filter, right? So that's why that's one of the reasons that that kind of that worried me about this series, right? Because I think we can't just embrace the whole video game industry. I don't know if that would agree. That's kind of the sense I got from watching the episodes and from watching and just trying to digest from what they were saying, right? And I think that's problematic for a number of reasons, right? I think one of the reasons is the values, right? So that's another really important thing that we need to talk about, because young people, they're spending their whole childhood in video games, right? And as a result, the games, they're not just entertaining, that's actually forming them. The games transmit something. What you spend your time with, that forms you. That has a formative power, right? So so if you could just play that clip, because he actually does mention this in the God and Gaming episode about the values and their relationship with the industry. So you can go ahead.
Time has come for you. Take Christ's gold and burn down his house.
It's not the right one. It's not the right one.
It's okay. It's all right. We'll get it. We'll get it.
One day he was beating up zombies or whatever the story was. But what my father was doing was not just tickling my imagination. In the end, he was forming virtue with them. I admired Karate Joe, his bravery, his ability to go out to fight, to rescue this princess or what have you. Video games are doing the same thing nowadays, many of them, not all of them, but many of them. They're giving, especially young men, this sense of virtuous purpose, that now I have a mission, I have to protect this village, I have to save this princess, I have to do this activity to save the world, and it's forming virtue within them. Now the trick's going to be, how do we transmit that virtue, that ideal, into the real world?
Right. So in this, in that clip, he's saying that video games, they can actually make you virtuous because they instill a sense of purpose, a sense of mission. And I would have to disagree with that, because even in a game, right? in a game you could be doing things that are like technically virtuous, right? You could be saving someone, you could be defending a town. It's interesting, in Skyrim you can save a town, but you can also choose to completely obliterate it, you know. But anyway, but the thing is that like a game, right, doing something virtuous in the game isn't necessarily going to make you more virtuous person. Just the same way like doing something violent isn't necessarily going to make you more violent, right? And the other thing I would say as well is that the games in general that are out there, you go into like a GameStop and you just like look at what's around, and it's just a lot of I just perceive like a lot of darkness and
So do you not think, just to go back to that first point, because I think that's a very important one, I have not watched the whole series God in Gaming. I've watched episodes, and I just, like, the world thing for me, I'm glad you hit that, because I had the same critique with that. We have to love the world and embrace it. I think you do have to have a bit of a nuance there, so thank you for that. The second thing I kept hearing is, and I was seeing in the comments as well, like, not young lads, like, you know, you're talking mid-30s, 40-year-olds, like, thanking. And they said exactly what you just said. Like, they feel like, you know, as a man, they're really, you know, embracing like this call, this inner call to be that hero, to like, you know, save the town, the princess. And like, I'm listening to that, right? I'm sorry if I'm just like living in a different world, but like I listen to that and I'm saying, you're a married man, and like playing these video games is going to make you more manly and virtuous, and that's going to help you in your marriage. Like, is that like, does that work? Like, I honestly, when I heard that, I just thought that was like, I'm sorry.
I think what they were getting at was that they find, like, men find it attractive because, like, they see exactly that. You know, they see, like, masculine, they can feel out, they can live out their masculinity.
It's virtual.
But it's not
real.
That's part of the problem, right?
It's a character that getting in a virtual game. That's not a reality.
Yeah, that's part of the issue, right? There's, like, I'm just like gaming in general, right? That's why it shouldn't be a lifestyle. It's something that, like, games, right? What's a game? It's something you put on the shelf and then you take it off, and then it's something you continue with your life, right? But one of the things I also wanted to talk about, one of the things that concerned me a lot with the series was, like, especially in the first episode, I mean throughout the other episodes as well, but in the first episodes, they were putting in clips of Assassin's Creed, which is basically, it's a series of games where you're an assassin. And the particular game that you would see... What is the
creed? Like, why is it called Assassin's Creed?
Well, the creed in Assassin's Creed is nothing is true and everything's permitted, right? Just
nice.
But
all right.
But like that particular game, you're an assassin in Egypt, and like Christians are not the enemy in the game. But what's concerning for me is that these series, like anyone that plays Assassin's Creed, anyone that knows the series, like knows that these games are actually, they can be very anti-Catholic and anti-Christian. And just starting from the first one, like the very first game of Assassin's Creed, you were killing the Crusaders. The second game, you actually assassinated the Pope. It was like a Borgia Pope, but you assassinated him in middle of the creed that he was saying, his creed.
Wow.
And typically, and then the newest one, like Valhalla, you're a Viking and you're raiding and burning down churches and monasteries, right? And like, what's interesting, and I think also concerning, is that in these games, the church is depicted very negatively. It's depicted as like corrupt, evil, people that want to wield power to abuse it. It's depicted as like this, you know, evil institution, and you have to be the one to take it down, right? And there's no positive depiction of Christians in this game, right? I think that's concerning, because like I said before, like kids are playing this game all over the world, and maybe they don't know anything else about like Christianity, right? And like that's their image of the church right there, right? So as like Catholics, like, we cannot promote Assassin's Creed. I'm sorry, but we cannot play Assassin's Creed. You cannot pay money for these games that are supporting these companies. I know in the series they said that there is such a thing as a bad game, and I would agree. I'd also agree that there is such a thing as a bad company, and that's Ubisoft, the people that design these games. They're typically known that Ubisoft is a company. They're known to be like political as well. They've made games that, I mean, they're kind of like left-wing politically. But as a Catholic, you cannot promote a series or games that's depicting the church like this. It's basically that's basically like, you know, I would even go to say that, like, if you play a game like that where you are attacking the church, I think there's even grounds for saying that this is actually against the second commandment. Like, and I think you could make an argument for that, because you're attacking your own faith in the game. Like, you're the protagonist doing that. And just to like give you an idea, right? There's a clip.
Is that the clip we saw before?
There was a clip we saw before. Sorry about
look,
that.
well, we were
But
seeing
I think
twice.
it's important. It's important that we like the people see this just to understand. So this is the newest Assassin's Creed game, and so just watch it. Just see it for yourself.
Time has come for you. Take Christ's gold and burn down his house.
Got it. So
if I'm playing that game,
so right, so like in that series, what you just saw, there was like a Viking charging in there saying like, take Christ's gold and burn his house down. And it's interesting because on Reddit, there was a Christian that played this game, and it was interesting his own experience playing this game. I just wanted to read it out because I think it's like illuminative of what's going on right now. He says, now I know that this is a work of fiction that was produced by a multicultural team of various faiths and beliefs, but good grief, like capitals. I find my character early in the game leading a charge against the monastery, shouting, take Christ's gold and burn his house down. The enemy soldiers are talking about how the Lord protects them as my men and I mow them down. It's really intense religious warfare kind of stuff. This kind of thing makes it quite hard for me to play the game as a Christian, to be actively attacking people who are calling on the help of Christ, whom I myself worship, and to be put in the position of attacking religious buildings while my crew is shout aggressively anti-Christian things makes me deeply uncomfortable, right? And later on, I think someone else added that Christianity is outright insulted and attacked at every turn, right? So, I mean, like, I can't embrace Assassin's Creed or I just can't blindly accept, like, every game that's out there, right? Like I said, like the world that's under the dominion of Satan, right? People talk about like demonizing games. I think it's pretty clear like the devil is in that game. I don't think I even have to demonize that. Like that's pretty sure. Like I think it's pretty evident the devil's behind that, right? And it's not just Assassin's Creed, right? There's other games as well that they mentioned that are concerning, right? So like BioShock is another one that's a popular one. They did have another, like that series also had a game in which Christians were the enemies. There was like this weird cultish kind of organization that Christians were weird, like brainwashed. And basically you have to, those are your enemies, right? That was BioShock Infinite. And so let's talk about, as far as like values goes, I think this is something that we need to look at. Like what kind of game, like what kind of values does this game actually promote? Another thing as well is that, with the advance of technology, like right now, like games have become incredibly realistic, right? They've become like so real that they've become almost as real as life, right? When you see like the graphics, right? The PlayStation 5, they have something that's called the geometry engine. And basically just within a very short space of time, like since over 20 years, we've advanced astronomically as far as graphics goes, right? But what's the result? The result is that the violence has also become like really brutal and really graphic. And that's also something we need to think about as well as like Catholics playing these games, like playing games that are like brutally violent. It's something we need to think about. And like one of the things that before I just want to like take a step back for a second, because before I even get into the subject of like violence in games, I want to just talk about want to mention Saint Ignatius of Loyola, because I think this can actually illuminate us on this. So, right, Saint Ignatius of Loyola, he started what was called the spiritual exercises, right? So basically, it's like a series of meditations you do over a month. And he would lead these meditations, and through these meditations, he actually forged like the greatest saints that church has ever seen, right? Like Saint Francis Xavier and other ones as well, right? And it's interesting, the very first meditation that he has in the spiritual exercises is called the Principle and Foundation, right? So the Principle and Foundation, and basically people that would be meditating on this would be thinking about this for the whole day. It could be a whole day, it could be a series of days. But basically, what you were supposed to meditate is this fact, right? The Principle and Foundation. He says, God created human beings to praise, reverence, and serve God, and by doing this, save their souls, right? So what does that mean? That means that my life, if I'm going to live like faithful to my own existence, like my life has to be an offering to God. Like I have to be, my life has to be an offering to him. Like everything in my life has to be acceptable to God, right? And I actually have to be able to give it to him with like a clean heart. So everything, it doesn't mean like I'm on my knees all day, but when it comes to things like entertainment, right? Like, can I really offer to God like, like 50 headshots in like in a game, or like, like shooting someone down as like blood is splurting everywhere. Like, can I really like offer that to God as like, as an offering? Because that's actually really important, because that's when I started getting into the faith. That was actually something that I started thinking about, because like when I started getting more into the faith and when I was still a gamer, I would invite Jesus into everything I was doing. And what happened was, when I started to play like video games, especially like games that were really violent, all of a sudden I found like this, like I started to become very uncomfortable, and found that I couldn't do that. Like I couldn't like invite Jesus into these games that I was playing, because it wasn't, it's not, it was just, I just saw it wasn't compatible, right? So, right, I'm not saying like, obviously not all games have the same level of violence in them, right? So like, like Mario Kart,
it get pretty brutal, man. If you shoot the red shell, like,
right,
some damage.
Right, not all games, they don't have the same level of violence, but these are things that we need to think about, right? And
but what if these guys were okay? Like you said, in fairness, I mean, they would probably agree with you on that, like as far as like the blood and gore parts.
I mean, I don't know actually, because when I got the video, I kind of got like a confused sensation, right? Because they did mention that we need to be prudent. Not every game is good to play. We need to like, make sure they're age appropriate. But then later in other episodes, they're talking about, Resident Evil, playing BioShock, like playing Assassin's Creed, right? So I was just kind of, I didn't know like what kind of games would it not be okay to play if those are okay to play, So I felt kind of confused when I was watching the series on that. And but a main like thrust that the series was living off, or kind of like gearing towards, was beauty, right? And that was a big thing with Word on Fire, like capitalizing on beauty, trying to bring people through beauty. And it is true, like the games that are out there, that can be like extraordinarily beautiful, right? Like the landscapes, like the scenery, they can have like amazing plots. Like now games have become more like cinematic experiences, right? So just based on how the industry is evolving. So they are beautiful, right? But at the same time, like I can't just remain there. I have to ask myself, like, where is this bringing me, right? Like it is beautiful, but like, where is it bringing me? Because even the devil, right? He can disguise himself as an angel of light. And the devil, like when he fools someone, he doesn't, appear to them
like a piece of crap.
Right. He knows not to use like ugliness, right? He knows how to use beauty as well. And, right. And even when we receive our confirmation, or we renew our baptismal promises, the bishop asks us, like, do you reject Satan and all his pomp and all his empty promises? And we say our do, right?
Do you want to get that word pomp? I think that's an important one. Pomp,
like beauty, right?
It's like a big bubble, like of like like it's really extraordinary, and the appearance is very attracting. You mentioned the book Hooked. Yeah. Like when you're fishing as well, like to get somebody hooked, you have to put a lure on it. You have to put something either bright or attractive to the fish, whatever. The fish, what he's gonna want. Some fish eat little baby ducks, the pike. So like your hook has a lure on it. You can't just put a hook out there.
Right.
It's not gonna bite. Like, so lures are attractive, beautiful. Like pomp it's an appearance, and we do renounce that. So like,
yeah, but
can the devil use beauty to lure you?
I think it's obvious we can, and we can't just like live by appearances, right? So like, and even though like back where I used to live in DC for a time, and there's people that would sometimes just change churches just because the music might have been better in one church or a different church, right? So that can't just be that can't be my only like criteria, right? And I think it's like dangerous to focus on the beauty in video games, especially if you start thinking about like where it's leading me and what kind of values they're promoting, right? Another thing I forgot to mention as well, that like a lot of these games, they can be very sexualized, right? There's a lot of kind of like sexualized content, like even a game for Fortnite, right? That's designed for like kids between the ages of like 10 to 15, typically. Like you look at the women in those games, and they're very like curvy, and I think. I mean, it's like the proportions of their bodies can be like very exaggerated. I think, what are they doing? Like they're like.
I mean, obviously, like I said, if I'm not like into the faith, and I know my audience is 10 to 15-year-olds, when like the hormones are like starting to wake up and going crazy.
Right.
You put the llama in there, you can put like the curves, like it's gonna get them. Like.
Yeah, I mean that's where I like draw like question marks as well, right? And right, I mean, with this whole conversation we're having right now, I don't want to just like bulldoze the whole issue, right? That's not what I want to do. And I hope that's like I think there are like you can play, like it's not It's okay to play a game of FIFA with a group of friends. It's okay to play like Mario Kart, you know. But I'm just looking at this like I'm trying to look at this as a whole right now, and to see like the majority of the games that are being produced right now, which are, I would say, they're not innocent, right? That they do have like a lot of these games do have like habit forming mechanisms, and they do promote values that are not Catholic, right? So that's kind of like the angle I was going off of. And another thing I wanted to add as well, just like drawing from my own personal experience, like as a former gamer, right? So I spent my whole childhood playing video games. And I mean, it's not something I'm proud of. It's not, even when I was a kid, I wasn't proud of it. Like I wouldn't be telling people, when people asked me what I would do in my free time, I would be,
go to the Skinner's Club.
I would try to be like, I try to avoid the question, right? But it did take up like a lot of my childhood. And there's one particular game that I spent a lot of time on. So I started with the PlayStation 1. Actually, I started with the Super Nintendo, then the PlayStation 1, moved up to the GameCube, Nintendo Wii, and then the Xbox 360. And then I went into online gaming, right? And there was one game in particular that I would play a lot. And it was called City of Villains. It was an online game, and basically what you were was that you're basically a supervillain, and I had a team of robots with me, and basically we do what supervillains would do. We would like rob banks, fight superheroes.
You're scandalizing me like this.
It wasn't as bad. It's not as bad as Grand Theft Auto, like on as far as like the morality. But anyway, that's what I was doing. And I literally, like, the highest level you could get in that game was level 50. And I got to level 49. Like, I had spent hundreds of hours in this game. Like, hundreds of hours of investment in playing this game. And when I played it, I really felt like I was accomplishing something. I really felt like I was building something. Like, you are building something. You're building, like, a character. You're making him more powerful.
A character or your character?
My character. My personal character.
Like, you personally were building your character?
Oh, not my personally. No, personally, no. But it was an online game, right? You could fight other players. And so I was building him up, and I almost got to level 50, and I decided to take a break, right? Because I'd spent... But when I came back, what I discovered was that the company actually shut down the server because it wasn't making enough money, the game.
So what does that
mean? The game was canceled. So not only could I never play the game anymore, I actually lost everything that I had ever worked for in that game. Like hundreds of hours invested, just lost in that moment. But it was actually a huge grace from God, because in that moment, I actually realized like what was happening. Like I realized what had just happened. Like I realized that all that time was wasted time, because I never grew in any way. I never constructed anything for myself that I could take with me for the rest of life. Like the achievements that I accomplished in the game, it was just all virtual. It just disintegrated, right? It was a wake up call for me, right? It was a wake up call that, and also made me to like think more critically, like how am I spending my time, right? Like what am I doing? I just like wasted all those hours, right? But in the moment, it doesn't feel like that. And I think that's one of the reasons why gaming is so attractive to a lot of people, because you really do feel like you're accomplishing something. You do feel like you're like progressing, and you are in a certain sense, but in reality, you're not.
Yeah.
In reality, it remains there, right? And as far as thinking critically about like how we spend our time, there's one thing I like to talk about with the kids with, and I think we also need to think critically about the messages that the gaming industry gives out, right? Especially one of the messages I like to focus on is PlayStation. So right now, the theme for PlayStation is play has no limits, if I'm not mistaken. But beforehand, they had this marketing campaign that it said greatness awaits. That was their marketing campaign, greatness awaits. Nice. And you like just think about that for a second. So like the greatness, what kind of greatness is PlayStation offering you, right? Like you can be a god. Right? They had an ad about this actually. He says, "Who are you not to be great?" Right? You can be a god. You can like command armies, right? You can do these incredible things in video games.
Dude, that makes you a man. It builds your character.
Well, it's like it's okay. It's great, but like what's the reality? The reality is that you're sitting like on your butt in front of a television screen for hours, right? Because games, like I said, they're not designed they're not designed just to be played and put back on the shelf. They're designed for you to be invested in them. That's why they end up becoming sagas, right? That some of them require like over 100 hours for you to beat.
Gosh.
And so that's what you're doing. And it's interesting because Pope Francis has actually spoken about this exact issue that we're facing right now with the young people. It's interesting. In World Youth Day, 2016 in Poland, he said he was talking to this massive crowd of young people, and he said that there's two different types of paralysis, right? There's two different things that can paralyze you in life. One is fear. Another one is confusing comfort with happiness. He called it sofa happiness. And I'm just gonna read some of this out here because it's incredible. He says, a sofa that promises us hours of comfort so we can escape to the world of video games and spend all kind of time in front of a computer screen. A sofa that keeps us safe from any kind of pain or fear. And he said this is probably the most harmful and insidious form of paralysis. Oof. And he says that it can cause a great harm to young people. And he even goes into talking about how the young people, they seem to be like retiring at the age of 20, right? And he said what's also interesting is that Pope Francis mentioned that for many people, in fact, it's much easier and better to have drowsy and dull kids who confuse happiness with a sofa. He's like, this is actually very convenient because what happens is that it kind of has it's like a sedative. And he says there's a lot of people that do not wish you well and want you to be drowsy, dull, and never free, so that basically that they can decide their future for you. Anyone that's listening to me, you can go and look up the homily that Pope Francis gave in its entirety. But he said this is actually very convenient because as long as the youth, as long as they're like sedated, this is very convenient for people that want to decide. They actually want to decide the future. They actually want to make they actually want to make changes, because as long as the youth are sedated, they're not going to be taking to the streets and demanding change if they're most concerned about if the video gaming is their life, right? If that's their lifestyle and their culture.
Like bread and circus, it makes me remind, I don't know. Right.
So there's a poet, a Roman poet. His name was Juvenal, and it's actually Pope Francis is actually making a reference to something that's very interesting. He said there's a Roman poet that was he's basically like a political commentator, and he coined the term bread and circus. And what that is that as long as he made the observation that as long as a government provides food and entertainment, the population can be completely manipulable, right? They can do whatever. They can basically you'll always get the votes, and you can always do whatever you want as a governor, right? And he called this bread and circus. So it seems to me that like Pope Francis, right, like given his vision of the world, I think he has like a vision of the world a lot of us don't have, just as his position as a world leader, just as like his understanding of what's going on right now, and like that was his observation that like this is actually convenient for a lot of people that want to make decisions. And I remember one time I shared this with a group of guys, and one of them told me, he's like, wait a minute, are you telling me that like video games are like part of this huge conspiracy that take over the world? And look, I'm not like, you can lead the homily for yourself. I'm just reflecting an observation. I'm reflecting an observation that Pope Francis has stated. Like, if there's something more to that behind the video game industry, like, I don't know. Like, maybe it's possible, right? I'm not going to say it's impossible.
Look, your most important points that you've made so far, and that, please God, people can come away with this. It's a reaction video that we're probably going to get about 500 views around there. Yeah, God in Gaming is going to get a lot more. It's getting out there. But we're doing our reaction because we saw something that didn't strike a chord with what we're doing, and we're not abstract boys sitting in an office right now. We're in continual contact with young people. It's something that I've been talking about every single time I go into the school. I'm mentioning TikTok a lot, but I'm mentioning like that stat, which is 2021, 7 hours of screen time that the average teenager has. It was 2021. But for anybody listening, which is probably going to be like the most worried people that are probably listening are moms that already had a problem with their son playing video games. Yeah. And they're just saying, well, look, I find myself before something that I have actually no control. It could be true. But like what we're saying is that you can't just stop something. This is an important point to make as well. You can't just stop doing something. I think Fulton Sheen said it in the gospel when that guy throws the devil out of his house. The Lord says, be careful. Be careful, because he's going to get thrown out. He's going to go to the desert. He's going to find 7 other of his friends. He's going to come back to the house, and the house is going to be worse than before. So what Fulton was saying, you can't just have a clean house, an empty house. You have to crowd the addiction out with a love that's overpowering. So it's not just like stopping something. You have to find a new hobby. Brother Steven's not going to say it, but he's very good at what's called the Diablo. It's like a big yo-yo, Chinese yo-yo. He's mastering that, so it's good because he'll give this talk in the class, and then he'll pull that out. So like a practical thing that I'm actually, that you could dedicate more time to, and that builds that builds good habits. And just to end with this, like the main points that you made, just to restate them, really, just that there are people behind these that have studied and they are forming habit, forming behaviors and addiction. That's true. You mentioned like harmful, violent, could be sexual content in them. I think that's something everybody knew. And the thing of the world, I think that's very important.
Right.
The idea of the world, we can't just say the world is the world. We have to make these distinctions and know that there is a prince of the world, and he will use whatever tools he can get, really, just to hook and to get us. So like those are important points. Last statement. You can't give us the blessing, but you can give a last statement maybe.
One last statement I want to make was that, like I said before, the motto, or like the slogan of PlayStation was "Greatness awaits." I just think like a better thing to keep in mind was something that Pope Benedict said. He said that the world promises you comfort, but you are not made for comfort. You are made for greatness. And I think that's the real greatness he was talking about, is like the greatness of sanctity. And another thing I want to mention that I didn't mention is like Carlos Acutis is an example of that.
Carlos Acutis was an avid gamer.
No, that's misinformation. That's not true.
That was in the show, though.
I know that they did mention that Carlos Acutis was an avid gamer. I think one of the reasons is because he did have a PlayStation, and maybe people have thought that he was an avid gamer, but he wasn't. Like his mom gives loads of interviews, and in one of those interviews, I remember her saying that Carlos Acutis, he actually limited himself to playing 1 hour a week. 1 hour a week. He limited himself. It wasn't even his mom. He limited himself to playing 1 hour a week. And his reason to his mom was that he did not want to be a slave of technology. And when I hear that, I'm like, that's greatness. Like he understands about the things about the world, what we're here for. Like we talk about St. Ignatius of Loyola, like the principle and foundation. And that my life, I can't just make gaming a lifestyle, right? And because that's not compatible with sanctity. And Carlos Acutis is an example of that, right? And so I just wanted to end with that. And
look, you're an avid religious, and I enjoyed your delivery. That's the word I'm looking for. You have a delivery. I was there when you watched it for the first time. I think your brother sent you the video, and you came down, and thanks be to God, it sparked something. And you've been doing these PowerPoints presentations in the schools, so praise God. Look, if it gets out to a good number of people, like that's not we did what we had to do. Like, you did what you had to do. You said what you had to say. You said it well. You said it with passion. I'm proud of you. You did a great job. But we'll end with a prayer, though, and we'll give the blessing to everybody who's listening. Monday, we're going to do a fireside. We're going to do it on Father Willie Doyle. So we're going to start doing this now. This is nice. We're going to actually have somebody in here where we can just have a conversation. And it's going to be on Father William Doyle, Willie Doyle. So he's an Irish priest who died really in the front lines in World War I. Extremely interesting story. So we're gonna have that on Monday. So please join us for that. And we'll end with the blessing, and hope all goes well for all of you guys. And get this video out there so it can do what it needs to do, just to bring people in to the truth and make some really important distinctions. I think it's a really important topic. So the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and forever shall be, world without end. Amen.
The Lord be with you.
With your spirit.
And may Almighty God bless you, the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen.